Today I'll be talking about the rights of indigenous people throughout the world, with a focus on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I will explain what is included in it, what countries support it or don't support it. I'll give it a general idea of what has been done around the world to improve the situation of indigenous peoples and what still needs to be improved. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is an international instrument adopted by the UN in 2007 to preserve the rights that constitute the minimum standards for the survival, dignity, and well-being of the indigenous peoples of the world. It sets out the individual and collective rights of indigenous peoples, as well as their rights to culture, identity, language, employment, health, education, and many other issues. It promotes their full and effective participation in all matters that concern them and their rights to remain distinct and to pursue their own visions of economic and social development. It is not legally binding, nor is it a statement of current international law. Originally, the DNRIP was voted in favor by 143 countries. The United States was not one of those countries. The US was one of the 4 countries, along with Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, that voted against it. Their argument against the UNDRIP was that the level of autonomy recognized for indigenous people in the declaration was problematic and would undermine the sovereignty of their own states, particularly in the context of land disputes and natural resources extraction, and that the declaration failed to provide a clear definition of exactly whom the term indigenous peoples cover. They accepted, however, that it may provide guiding principles that national courts could use to judge a government's actions in cases involving indigenous people. Since 2010, all 4 nations have moved to endorse the declaration, however. In the beginning, the United States opposed the declaration, but in 2010, President Obama announced that the United States changed its position and supported it. The endorsement included several interpretations of the meaning of the declaration. Since then, many programs aimed at Native Americans have emerged. In 2010, the Obama administration also signed the Tribal Law and Order Act, which allowed tribal courts to extend and expand sentences handed down to them in criminal cases, strengthening tribal autonomy. He also supported and enforced Executive Order 13175, which requires the federal government to consult with tribal governments when debating over policies and programs that affect the tribal communities. Obama also supported them through provisions of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, which allocated $510 million for rehabilitation of Native American housing and the settlement of a lawsuit case against the Department of Agriculture for discrimination against Native Americans. Michelle Obama also started a program called Let's Move in Indian Country. It aims to improve opportunities for physical activity, increase access to healthy food, and to create collaborations between private and public sectors to build programs that will end childhood obesity in Native communities. Throughout the world, many other countries and regions have done or not done things to improve the situation for their indigenous peoples. Here are a few of them. In Brazil, their constitution recognizes the rights of indigenous people to live in their traditional territories according to their lifestyle. It also states that the government is responsible for the demarcation of indigenous lands and is in charge of providing bilingual education and healthcare adapted to their needs and beliefs. In reality, however, although most of the important lands are legally demarcated, the government has not provided the communities with the promised education and healthcare, and some groups continue to face persecution due to poor migrant populations that are relocating to begin subsistence farming or to search for gold, and thus end up infringing on indigenous territory or competing with them for resources. In the Rio Declaration, the special relationship between indigenous peoples and their lands is acknowledged. They have a vital role in environmental management and development because of their traditional knowledge and practices. In order to fully use that knowledge, some natives might need greater control over their lands, self-management of their resources, and participation in development decisions affecting them. In Asia, there is the Asian Indigenous Women's Network, which aims to support, sustain, and help consolidate the various efforts of the indigenous women in Asia to critically understand the roots of their marginalized situation and to empower themselves by becoming aware of their rights as women and as indigenous peoples. There is also the Philippines Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. It is one of the first laws in Asia that recognizes indigenous peoples' rights to their ancestral domains and to cultural integrity, including the rights to self-governance and self-determination. Even though Australia was one of the last countries to sign the declaration, it has been trying to help natives since before that. In their constitution, Aboriginal Australians always had the legal right to vote in elections if their state granted them that right. By 1983, they had 6 Indigenous Australians elected to the Senate, and in 2010 they got the first Indigenous Australian elected to the House of Representatives. In 2004, John Howard initiated contracts with Aboriginal communities where substantial financial benefits are available in return for commitments such as ensuring children attend school. This was criticized by many indigenous peoples as a paternalistic and dictatorial arrangement. So in conclusion, even though the situation for indigenous peoples have been getting better worldwide gradually, with most countries around the globe having signed the UNDRIP, there is still a lot more to improve, especially since the UNDRIP is not considered international law. There are still many states discriminating against indigenous people, withholding citizenship or other rights, evicting them from their native lands, removing their resources and natural assets, and still many countries fail to recognize them as a legitimate group, excluding them from political forums, denying them access to legal avenues to defend their rights, or simply neglecting or ignoring them. Here are all the sources where I found my information, and I will add the links to all these in the blog as well. Thank you for watching.